All right, there we are. Hello, Aaron Girl and Jonathan. Can you guys hear me and see me okay? Let's do a little bit of a audio video check. Get started early. How are we doing? Looks like I'm registering on the meter at this end. Sounds good, sir. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Outstanding. And we will go ahead and launch right into this. We're going to be speaking about Sigmund Freud this evening and his nephew, Edward Bernays, as I mentioned yesterday. Thank you, Aaron Girl. Good. Sounds good. And the video. Excellent. And we're going to have a few people, I'm sure, straggling in here, so I may repeat myself a little bit, but we'll go ahead and get started and make good use of everyone's time. The topic that we're covering tonight, I'm entitling Psychoanalysis and the American Dream: Democracy and Capitalism Through Control of the Masses of Humanity. The Influence of Dr. Sigmund Freud and his nephew, Edward Bernays, the author of the book Propaganda in 1928. Okay? Andy, welcome. Good to see you jumping in here. All right. So, psychoanalysis and the American dream. How do we link all of that together? Well, we're going to talk about public relations, a term, a title that was attributed to Edward Bernays, essentially the inventor of the term, of the notion of public relations. And Edward Bernays was inspired, of course, by the theories in psychoanalysis by his uncle, Dr. Sigmund Freud. So we're going to see essentially how the American public, the mass public, was manipulated in public relations, marketing, and advertising. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. I'm really just kind of giving you the introduction to this. If it sparks your interest, you can do more research on your own, or you can let me know that you have questions by way of email, and we can go through it that way. But suffice it to say, I have written a short article, I think it's 3 or 4 pages, for the August issue of Entangled magazine entitled Psychoanalysis and the American Dream, and I tie this back to our discussions of Neuralink by way of Elon Musk and his company Neuralink. This was in a couple of live streams ago last week, Wednesday and Thursday, that we spoke about this. So what I would like to do is take the time to read this article to you, just because it makes it efficient to get the point across, and in deference to, the time factor this evening. And once we've completed that, we will then touch on a couple of news items that I sent to you through Patreon. And by the way, tonight's broadcast is not public, the chat room, etc., but later will be made available to the public on YouTube. So Doug Diamond, our infamous and famous and very proficient webmaster and all things audio and video engineering expert, who keeps all of this going, including creating the cover of Entangled magazine, which I'll show you right now, the cover that we have for this month. And there it is. I showed this to you yesterday, but this is Doug's creation. So if you have any needs for audio, video, website creation and maintenance, and Photoshop artwork, graphics artwork, Doug Diamond from Diamond Digital Media would be more than happy to help you out. So, link is available at anthonypatch.com on the homepage. So anyone who's listening to this live stream by way of the public broadcast on YouTube later, that's who's holding this all together and who I consider to be a great Christian brother and friend. And also encourage you to look at the monthly magazine that we publish here, Entangled magazine. Now 18 months old, almost 19 months old with the August issue. And this month's issue is entitled Brain-Machine Interfaces. So, knowing of that, we are going to tie brain-machine, brain-computer interfaces in with Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud. The magazine will contain a lot more information, a lot more topics than what I'm simply giving you in brief tonight. And that will be due out on the 1st of the month, as it always is. Okay, so we've got Jonathan and Andy and Aaron Girl, and who else is scrolling in here? Let's see. Alrighty. Cool. Well, good, Andy. I hope the moon hoax presentation yesterday in our live stream served the purpose of answering a great many questions about why I consider it to be a hoax. And I referenced an outstanding book as well in the live stream, should you want to reference more of the details, what I consider the evidence proving that it was a hoax. But what I offered to you about the hoax of the moon landing was kind of a glimmer of hope, maybe a positive spin on it, as a good public relations man would do, put a positive spin on the hoax. What was the reason? What was the purpose? Was it purely a malevolent move? Was it something that I should be decidedly cynical about? Not really. Not really. It was done to bolster the morale of the American citizens and those that were, our allies that were supporting the American way of life. Democracy, something we're going to talk about tonight. And in that understanding of the 60s and 70s, the turmoil in this country, the citizens really needed something they could look up to, something they could hang their hat on, something they could be proud of. Because remember, we had Vietnam, we had the hippie movement, we had the rock and roll movement, we had, all of these things going on at the same time, the drugs, LSD, coming into favor. Civil rights issues, certainly marches and riots and people being shot, and that turmoil in the country really, if we didn't have the Moon Project, it's conceivable that this country would have moved into a full-blown state of chaos and perhaps anarchy. So I think it was a psychological program. And literally the billions of dollars spent on it perhaps were spent to hold the threads of democracy together. So that's my spin on it. I don't want to be completely negative, even though I'm considering it to be in the category of a hoax. I think it was done for psychological reasons, positive psychological reasons. So without belaboring that point too much and rehashing and retracing ground that we spent 2.5 hours on yesterday, let's move ahead. First off, we always start with Scripture, or at least I try to begin with Scripture. Let's begin this evening with 1 Corinthians 2, verses 9 and 10. Rather it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. At verse 10, but God has revealed it to us by the Spirit. Kathleen and I had a long conversation this morning about this topic. It springboards from the broader topic of what we've covered in the past in a webinar almost 2 years ago. And what we've mentioned of late in the last couple of live streams is the concept of the fullness of the Gentiles. And part of that concept of the fullness is the fullness of how God is transforming us through the Holy Spirit. We've made the position that when we examine the evidence of evil and we see the things that are coming upon and coming across this world and across humanity by way of Satan and his minions, the counter to that, and even the surpassing, because it's of God, the surpassing of whatever it is that Satan is doing in this world, by the mind of God changing those that are his, that are found in the book of life, that are his seed. We are Christians. We have stated our belief in the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, who was crucified, who shed his blood for the redemption of our souls, salvation from our sin, justification of us through his blood, who was buried for 3 days and arose, the ascension back to the Father. The gospel, the holy gospel, the truth, the true Messiah. And through the true Messiah and the gifting by way of the true Messiah, the gifting of the Holy Spirit, we are, as the Gentiles, our fullness is the transformation of us. And it is not a New Age concept. This is not, some mystical thing in the sense of New Age, but it is mystical. It is supernatural from God our Creator, that we, as his own, are undergoing in the present a transformation. If you want to call it an augmentation, that's fine. But in order to not just balance, but to surpass the evil that's coming upon the world already, in conjunction with the full armor afforded to us through the Holy Spirit, through the renewing of our minds, through the shedding of the blood of Jesus Christ on the cross, through what I believe is the renewing of our actual DNA through the blood of Jesus Christ, his DNA, we will always rise above whatever Satan is doing to humanity around the world. So I want to dispel and take away any fear, because this is not about fear. This is about understanding the enemy, the ways of the enemy, understanding what is going on in the world today to try to make some sense of it by examining the mechanisms, examining the technology. This evening, examining the technology and psychology that's from the pit of hell. I'll say it right here. Freud was not a Christian believer. His theories of psychoanalysis, I believe, were satanic in origin. Because even, as I'll point out in my article that I'm going to briefly read to you this evening, towards his latter days, Freud, who was suffering from cancer, aggressive cancer of the jaw, because he was a prolific smoker of cigars, found that he was profoundly pessimistic about mankind and the future for mankind. He viewed mankind as sadistic, and essentially there was no hope for humanity. Well, it's unfortunate because Freud did not have the Holy Spirit. He did not have a personal relationship with our Savior, Jesus Christ. No wonder he came to this conclusion at the end of his days. But he influenced his nephew, Edward Bernays, who we're going to be reviewing a little bit about tonight. And that influence, understanding its origin, has influenced certainly the American society, the American public, but by way of that, influenced the entire world as well, through his view of humanity. A very tainted view, a very sour view of humanity. And yet, psychoanalysis is something, as I will illustrate this evening, is something that came to dominate the corporate business world and the political world. So I offer this to you this evening because it is somewhat of a introductory explanation as to the state of affairs in this union we call the United States of America. But again, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, rather as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed it to us by the Spirit. And this is what's happening in these live streams. This is what's happening when you are in your quiet time with the Lord, when you're seeking through the Holy Spirit. He will reveal to you. These are the days that the book that was sealed up, that Daniel was commanded to seal up until the latter days. These are the days, and the book is unsealed. And we are going through the process of achieving that fullness that only God can define, but nonetheless a fullness of the Gentiles, a fullness of an understanding, a fullness of our supernatural capabilities. Yes, supernatural capabilities. So take that as encouragement. I hope you will. Okay? Let me read just a little bit more regarding these verses. The Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of man except his own spirit within him? So too, no one knows the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. We have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we may understand what God has freely given us. And this is what we speak, not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths in spiritual words. Verse 14, the natural man does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them, because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual man judges all things, but he himself is not subject to anyone's judgment. For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. Now, I love these verses because it so well speaks of the encouragement that we can draw from this. We really don't have anything to worry about, folks, concerning ourselves. But it is not for us to just be concerned about ourselves. That's the trap that Edward Bernays was able to entrap the general public, the so-called masses that we're going to examine, because it became all about me. And that's not the way of Jesus Christ. The way that we are supposed to behave in a Christ-like manner is to share the gospel with others for their salvation. So, we should be concerned when we examine the evidence of evil, when we look back through the pages of even recent history, and understand the dire state that those that are not saved find themselves in. Find themselves either knowingly or unknowingly within the state of the union of the entire world. So if you will allow me, I'm going to take a moment and read a few pages from Entangled magazine for the August issue. And again, this will give us a brief overview of what it is what point I'm trying to drive home about the state of our union. Psychoanalysis and the American Dream. Democracy and capitalism through control of the masses of humanity. The influence of Dr. Sigmund Freud and his nephew, Edward Bernays, author of the book Propaganda, published in 1928. Pardon me, I'm going to move my microphone just a little bit here. Okay. Few are consciously aware of the origins of today's modern democratic society and its attendant capitalist system. This is not a paper in opposition to either component of the present American way of life. It is an examination of the published theories of Dr. Sigmund Freud and how through his nephew Edward Bernays, they directly influence the nature of democracy by linking the consuming of mass-produced goods to the unconscious minds of the human population. Though not intended as an exhaustive white paper, touch points herein are provided to further the reader's interest and reflection upon the present condition of American society at large. It is from the adoption of a larger perspective the subject of psychoanalysis is applied in gaining an understanding of the resultant control mechanisms found at play today. Following the reading of a general introduction to psychoanalysis provided in return for a gift box of Cuban cigars, Edward Bernays developed his own notions of a new political idea of how to control the masses by satisfying people's inner selfish desires. In essence, make people happy, thus docile. Bernays viewed the masses as prone to their all-consuming self. This has come to dominate the world today. Freud took the position that hidden within every individual were dangerous instinctual drives that needed externally to be controlled. Bernays, driven by his own instinctual greed, saw in Freud's theories an opportunity to capitalize upon them. He knew of propaganda from its use during times of war and sought to use the same in times of peace. However, due to its negative stigma, Bernays changed propaganda to, quote, public relations council, or sometimes as, quote, council on public relations. The term public relations was not found in the common lexicon of the early 20th century. Effectively, Bernays both invented and greatly capitalized upon its application within both the private business and political sectors. For what was good for the businessman was found to be as well for the politicians. With the advent of the industrial era, millions of people were attracted to cities for employment. It was within these masses that Bernays found willing leaders of business and government seeking management of the same through the alteration of thoughts. Freud, through his general introduction of psychoanalysis, had gifted his nephew Bernays with direct insights to, and again, according to his theories, the hidden irrational forces alive within every human mind. Thus, both men having taken on a profoundly elitist viewpoint over the masses, created within businessmen and politicians the same mindset. Bernays was, as stated, driven by visions of acquiring great personal wealth by way of manipulating, on a massive scale, the unconscious minds of the people. What he learned from his Uncle Sigmund, there was a lot more going on in human decision-making, not only among individuals, but more importantly, among groups. For it was here Bernays was to apply his focus. Bernays came to understand the commonly held belief in the world of advertising that information and rational decision-making drove buying behavior was patently false. He developed advertising and marketing campaigns designed purposefully to target the irrational emotions of the masses. It was Bernays who convinced, through his clients, people into believing they would feel better about themselves by purchasing a product or engaging in a service. Simply stated, they would feel better with a given product. He was establishing an emotional connection for them to a product. Bernays was shifting America from a needs to a desire buying culture. Learning of Bernays and his methods, a Wall Street banker by the name of Paul Mazur of Lehman Brothers determined masses of people needed to be trained to desire new things. Thus, a new American mentality was being crafted. What Mazur collaboration with Bernays, succeeded in accomplishing within the American population was in appealing to their emotional desires, to a near complete overshadowing of their actual needs. And with this, another term came into the American lexicon: consumerism. In the early days following World War I, manufacturers found themselves anxious over the specter of oversupply of their goods due to their successful adoption of mass production of war materials. They feared the public would revert back to their former needs-based pattern of behavior. In Bernays and his use of Freud's psychoanalysis, they found their savior. Using psychology, they came to understand how to appeal to the masses by learning what motivates the human mind. During the 1920s, New York banks funded chains of department stores around America. These were the needed outlets for the mass-produced goods. It should be noted that near the end of Freud's own life, he found himself profoundly pessimistic about the fate of mankind. He viewed man as sadistic and overall, as he put it, a bad species. He, along with Bernays, viewed the mentality of, quote, the mobs being the guiding principles of democracy as simply wrong. The belief that human beings could be trusted to make the right decisions on a rational basis was, in their mutual view, wrong. It was during these times a prominent political writer of the day, Walter Lippmann, promoted the idea of rethinking democracy itself. He put forth the notion a new elite was needed who could manage, as he wrote, quote, the bewildered herd. Lippmann campaigned for the employment of psychological techniques to control the unconscious feelings of the masses. He viewed mob mentality as driven not by their minds, but their spinal columns. Together, Lippmann and Bernays instituted the engineering of a consent democracy. The mobs had to be guided from above. Effectively, they created an engineered despotism. They were tapping into the deepest desires or fears, using these to their own purposes and those of a new controlling elite. In 1928, President Herbert Hoover endorsed that consumerism had become the central motor of American life. He told advertisers and public relations men, quote, you've taken over the job of creating desire and transformed people into constantly moving happiness machines, machines that have become the key to economic progress. End quote. Thus, passive consumers made up the masses, realizing a new form of capitalism within a democracy controlled by a small group of elites. Today, the people are not in control. Their desires are in charge. They exercise no decision-making within this environment. The controllers know if they can trigger those needs and desires, they can get whatever they want from the masses. The environment is manipulated to influence the human personality. This produces for people a sense of common identity with those around them. This is their strategy employed for the creating of a stable society based upon a strategy of desire. Within a capitalist democracy, the idea of a product improving one's self-image forms the cornerstone upon which the controlling elite elevate control of the masses they view as fundamentally irrational. Now, in conclusion, today's elite continue to employ psychological techniques to control whom they regard as irrational masses. However, with the advent of the latest in brain-machine computer interfaces, purely psychological techniques can be bypassed in favor of an accelerated means of controlling the now docile masses. Effectively, we are left with a new form of an AI-driven, despotic, capitalist democracy. Let me check the chat room, see if you have any questions. All right, we'll continue on with this. So interesting, I would hope that you find this, that in essence, in summary, from my article, what we have here is a situation where what arguably, I would argue, the point Freud himself was sick, psychologically was sick. And viewing people in such a negative fashion as to promote this idea that they were incapable of thinking for themselves, certainly not thinking in a conscious manner. Now, you know that I have promoted here the idea, as I said at the end of yesterday's live stream, as I've said in virtually every live stream, and is on my homepage at the Patreon homepage, and my homepage at anthonypatch.com, I have for years promoted and encouraged critical thinking, independent thinking, to not be part of the masses. If Freud is correct in assuming, in theorizing, that the masses are subject to mob mentality, thereby operating, as Walter Lippmann says, as he wrote, thinking and acting only with their spinal column. I've said it differently. I've said the brain stem, which of course is part of the spinal column, but I said that, people have been conditioned to think emotionally. And it is on that point that I agree with Freud, only because the outcome of what Freud and Bernays pushed upon the American public at the turn of the 20th century thus has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have been extremely successful in focusing upon the mob and manipulating the mob by appealing to their emotional level, to their instinctual level, to their brainstem level, what I have labeled as the lemmings. Now, recall yesterday when I was referring to Laurel Canyon and the psychological operation of the MK Ultra musicians and songwriters and politicians that all migrated, I use that word specifically, migrated to Laurel Canyon, setting up essentially a commune in what they called the Great Log Cabin. It was a huge home. But I cited and quoted Frank Zappa saying that he could not explain, nor could his friends there, his new friends, explain how it came to be that they were all somehow led to Laurel Canyon. He described it as they were like lemmings. And I found that interesting that he used that name, that label of lemmings, because it's a label that I have used for many years to describe the programming, the influencing of the masses in the United States, and by default the entire world, to behaving like lemmings, which are mindless little rodents. Now that sounds terrible. I'm beginning to sound like Freud, but Freud put forth this negative about how people think, and this pejorative about the masses, and to just appeal to their base instincts and desires. And as Bernays leveraged that of Freud for the purpose of consuming mass-produced goods for the enrichment of Bernays and those that were his clients, corporate America and politicians alike. So the American public has been force-fed into Freud's theory that the human condition is one that is driven by base instincts and is devoid of critical thinking, of independent thinking, that it is mob mentality, and therefore applied into the American society, our way of running our society politically, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, even back to the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's been violated. That's been shot down by Freud and Bernays and others. It's an attack on our way of life. To produce a population that is manipulated as a mob at that mob mentality level. Certainly mob mentality does exist. But the evil in it is to then capitalize upon the natural mob mentality, to encourage it, and to profit by it. To me, that adds up and defines evidence of evil. There's nothing benevolent going on here. Look at the state of our country as a result of Freud and Bernays and others that followed in their footsteps. Even President Herbert Hoover and others after him. So nothing's changed. If anything, it has only been reinforced through the years, since the early 1920s. So I recommended a couple of books yesterday. I would recommend, if you have interest in delving into the deeper aspects of this, Bernays' book, Propaganda, last name is spelled B-E-R-N-A-Y-S, Edward Bernays, published in 1928, still available on Amazon or any other location, I'm sure, if you want to dig into this deeper. But my final thoughts on this is that we have used the term herd and herd mentality and sheep, and I've used the term lemmings, not very complimentary. I think we all have been influenced to a certain degree by Freud and Bernays. We are all consumers. We are all part of this society that is a self-fulfilling prophecy of this way of controlling the masses. But as I said yesterday when I was talking about the Kabbalistic notion and now the quantum Darwinism theory of decoherence. So if I need to interject some science here beyond just psychoanalysis, going back to decoherence, the Kabbalist defines it and the quantum physicist defines decoherence as that which is influenced by its environment. Devoid of the influence of an environment, it remains as an energy wave and does not collapse to a physical form. That's the Kabbalist influencing, promoting, in scientific terms, quantum physics today. So how does that relate to psychoanalysis? Well, if we're talking about the masses, and the masses influenced by one another, by definition it is a mass of people, thus they are in the same environment together, and they are influenced as a mass by the environment they're in. But within the group, within the mass, that is also an environment. There is a cause and effect relationship. So let me, in my terms, define mob mentality. And that is something that I taught for many years as a paramedic in my last few years as an educator. What I call sensory overload. Imagine, if you will, you want to think critically about a given topic. You want to approach it logically, analytically. You want to research it. You want to think about it, maybe have a conversation with one or two other people about it. But certainly you're doing this in a quiet environment without a whole lot of external inputs into your senses. Now, picture yourself trying to perform the same task in the middle of a football stadium full of people, and the game has been well underway. Are you going to be able to conduct any critical thinking, any logical thinking, any research, coming to reasonably considered conclusions in the middle of a football game in a stadium? Obviously, that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish. In that football stadium scenario, what is at play beyond the football game itself is a massive assault on your senses. Picture yourself at a political rally, or if you're prone to being a demonstrator, you're out in the streets demonstrating. Your senses are being assaulted. What happens in sensory overload is your prefrontal cortex, where critical thinking takes place, shuts down. It shifts your mental state down to the brainstem level, what is known in science as the first brain. Also in science, interestingly, they refer to it as the reptilian brain. Fight or flight instincts, base emotions and drives. What Freud was examining with his psychoanalytical theories. He was focused on the brainstem, and he was, in a negative fashion, pointing to the masses, pointing to the mobs, and saying they were incapable in a democracy of determining the direction of a country. Both Freud and Bernays, and those that followed along in their footsteps, were despots. Now, just for fun, we always like to define. Let me just take a little sidebar here, and let me define despotic for you. Not that you don't know it, but it's always fun to read it. It's an adjective of or typical of a despot. Tyrannical. That's not a Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's tyrannical. A despotic regime. Autocratic, dictatorial, totalitarian, authoritarian, absolute, absolutist, arbitrary, unconstitutional, undemocratic, anti-democratic, uncontrolled, unaccountable. Okay? I would use those words if I were the president and delivering the State of the Union address, because that's where we find ourselves. Freud and Bernays were pushing the concept of the elite governing the masses because the masses were incapable of properly determining their future, even in a democracy. That's authoritarian. That's a dictatorship in its extreme. And we find ourselves immersed in such a society. And now with the advent of quantum computing, spawning the advanced levels of artificial intelligence, and all the conversations we've had about those topics, you can now see why I'm devoting the August issue to not only psychoanalysis and the American dream, but to its relationship to AI and its attendant brain-machine, brain-computer linking, as we examined last Wednesday and Thursday with Elon Musk. So, as a backdrop in my final comments on this will be kind of a short broadcast tonight. I do have some news article type things we'll go through after the break at the top of the hour. We'll take our 5-minute break. But my final points on this psychoanalysis and the American dream as it relates to AI is this. What Freud and Bernays put into motion took many, many years for it to reach the point that we're at now. 100 years, in fact. 1928, Propaganda was published. But all of this started at the turn of the century, the 20th century. It actually started back in the 1800s and the late 1700s with the kicking off of the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Era. And we started to see masses of people congregating in the cities because of the Industrial Revolution. And you know that I've demonstrated to you the Kabbalistic origins and leveraging of the Industrial Revolution to accelerate and hasten the return of their Mashiach. So without getting into the weeds on that again, keep that as a backdrop to this 100-year development, over 100 years now, of the mob mentality put forth in psychoanalysis, adopted into the greater body of psychiatry and psychiatrists and psychologists. They've all bought into it, promoted it, taken advantage of the fact that people have been congregating in the millions into cities throughout the United States and in other countries. And thus, this sensory overload within the cities overwhelms the thinking, debasing, debilitating critical thinking on the part of what was termed the herd. So I'm sort of coming to the rescue of the herd, of the mob. They're victims of the environment. They're certainly victims of advertising and public relations campaigns extending into the corporate and political arenas. But it's by design. That's the insidious part of this. This is the evil part of this. It's by design. Through science. By design. Pushed upon the American and therefore the entire world population. This manipulation of people by their environment who were forced to think the way that Freud pointed the finger of accusation at people, forced to think instinctively at the brainstem level, to move like lemmings, to be easily influenced like lemmings. It's not really the mob's fault. It's not really the herd's fault. The environment constructed artificially around them has pushed their critical thinking down into the brainstem level. And thereby they are subject to mob mentality because of the sensory overload that they experience in the cities. Now, anyone who's not necessarily finding themselves in a mob sort of situation, even if you're living in the city, you're able to, as I said at the end of the live stream yesterday, you can detach yourself. You can recohere yourself. You can gain coherence. You don't have to suffer decoherence because of the environment, which is what the Kabbalists are pushing, okay, through science, is decoherence of the mind, so they can manipulate you, so they can control you. Okay? The idea is to lessen the sensory overload that you individually experience. You have control over your environment to a certain degree. So if it's the football game, as I said yesterday and I mentioned just now, turn off the football game. Turn off the basketball game. Turn off the baseball game. Turn off those things that are preventing you at a sensory level from using your prefrontal cortex and thinking critically, thinking independently. When you do so, the result is this. You get a ticket on patch air, and you rise by way of that aircraft to 30,000 feet. You rise above the crowd. You rise above the sensory overload. You see the bigger picture. You see the game board produced by people like Freud and Bernays. You see the game board that's been pushed upon the herd. You realize it's a game. You are learning the rules of the game. You're learning who the players are that are the elite, so to speak, that are manipulating the game because the game is rigged by them, and you rise above it. You think independently. You make your own decisions. Okay? So with that, let's go ahead and break early, and then we'll go into a couple of news items that I sent to you earlier by way of Patreon. I'll put on some music for us, and we'll all take a little personal break for 5 minutes and rejoin you in just a few minutes. All right, my friends, we'll get back to it here, and I'll put the earpiece in, make sure everything's working. Give me a thumbs up in the chat room if you can see and hear me okay. It's a little dark. I'll go turn some lights on, but can you see and hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you, George. Okay, I'll flip some lights on, and we'll get right to it. We're going to talk about smart cities. What a segue, huh? So we talked about cities, Freud's view of the mobs and the herd, sensory overload, brainstem and lemmings, and all of that stuff. So let's go to an article that I have saved for you. I don't think I sent this to you. This comes from an organization called SAP, the Future of Urban Cities Customer Experience. Now, my wife is going to appreciate this, I think, because she's from Boston. Boston issued a challenge to technologists, scientists, researchers, journalists, and smart city activists to propose ideas that would engage its constituents. Quote, we're happy if you have a technology for us to use internally, something that'll make a city department work easier. The Boston Smart City Playbook states. But we'd be even happier if you were solving problems for residents. So, with the backdrop again, Freud and Bernays, and their attitude, and therefore the attitude of, quote, the elite, towards those living in the cities, the mob, we're talking about smart city planning and development. In 2017, Boston was at a crossroads. Now, this is a new article, but they're going back a little bit. In 2017, Boston was at a crossroads in its approach to smart city planning and development. In preceding years, it had implemented a number of initiatives to streamline its operations with the data and analytics, which had delivered significant value. Now officials were seeing the possibilities for technology to create new and improved services for its residents. Now, if you were having a conversation with my wife and posed the question, since 2017, has Boston improved? I think you would hear a resounding no. If anything, it's gotten worse. What's relevant to you and I here in this presentation is that smart cities is the new control mechanism. And you already know that from all the things we've discussed over the years. You know that smart cities is just another label for controlling the masses. But now you see where the origins of smart cities comes from. And when I said prior to the break that AI, by way of quantum computing, is now going to do an end run around psychoanalysis, around psychological programs to manipulate the masses, to accelerate the process of controlling the masses. That's what smart cities are all about. Okay? They've succeeded in herding people into the cities, into the millions, providing a more focused control of people because they're not spread out all over the the suburban and the agricultural miles upon miles, the flyover portion, the flyover states of the United States. People are where they can be more easily found and controlled and direct the technology towards. In fact, in this article, they have a photograph of two people with virtual reality goggles on. So within the smart city, they're trying to create this virtual reality and augmented reality environment to draw people into the technology. You see, they don't need psychology anymore. They have technology. They don't need the long, slow, deliberate process of marketing and advertising, of pushing people slowly but steadily into the direction of being consumers, and consumers of targeted products. Targeted products because those in the elite have a vested interest in the sale of their products and services. And so people were psychologically influenced through their emotions to become emotionally attached to product and services. That's a long process. Now bring in the Internet of Things, the Internet of all things. And I'm leaping ahead again to the August issue, the linking of the minds to the machines. And not just with virtual reality goggles and glasses, not just with an augmented reality environment, but a direct connection between the computer and the mind by a physical connection, which we elaborated on Wednesday and Thursday of last week. The physical implantation in the human brain of fibers that act as sending and receiving antennas placed alongside the neurons within the human brain. I think Freud would applaud it. I think Bernays would be jumping up and down and checking his bank account, because he would find a way to leverage it and profit by it. So the Freuds of today and the Bernays of today are those technocrats, both in the business corporate world and in the public sector political arena, are embracing artificial intelligence because they see the acceleration of their ability, the enhancement of their ability to control the masses. So as I read a few more excerpts from this article, I won't read the entirety of it, apply our technique in critical thinking of reading a propaganda piece, a fluff piece, and applying the technique of 180 to turn their words around, thus revealing the truth of what is really going on here. Bear that in mind as I continue to read. Globally, there is no shortage of smart city initiatives, but the outcomes thus far have been underwhelming. Very few sustainable, repeatable solutions have emerged to improve the way people interact with their cities as physical or social spaces, or to redesign urban life in any fundamental way. Boston's reality check and call to arms was perhaps a good start to redirect and re-energize its efforts toward local business people trying to keep up with digital disruptors. So, they're listing the digital disruptors here. For example, commuters struggling with parking and transportation. I'll tell you from my personal experience as well as my wife's, The number one problem in Boston is commuters struggling with parking and transportation. That transportation system is completely broken. In fact, it was about 6 months ago that there was a poll, there was a ranking done of cities in the United States regarding transportation, and Boston was number one as the worst city for traffic and transportation. Okay? And it's not even the biggest city. Commuters struggling with parking and transportation, city dwellers worried about unchecked development, affordable rents, and sustainability, or average citizens concerned about safe streets. But there and elsewhere, smart city advocates within and outside of government have discovered that a key piece has been missing. Now here you apply your 180 technique in particular if you haven't already. Participation by the millions who live, work, and seek entertainment in urban spaces. Now, why entertainment? Why are they saying seeking entertainment? Why aren't they saying seeking quality of life, seeking employment, seeking better transportation, seeking better housing? No, what they put at the top of their list here, seeking entertainment in urban spaces. Think psychologically here. Brainstem. Appealing to the emotions. That's entertainment. They are seeking to control the urban dweller first, primarily through entertainment. As the advocates of the smart city development, starting with their age-old control mechanism, appealing to the senses, the emotions, the brainstem, the entertainment, bread and circus. Continuing with the article. Just as businesses are embracing a future driven by the customer experience, okay? A future driven by the customer, a consumer experience, right? It's all about consumerism. See, I don't have a problem with consumerism in its essence. Capitalism in its essence. I think capitalism's the best thing that we have amongst the choices we have. Is it the ideal? Is capitalism utopia? Certainly not. But it's the best system we have to work with right now in the beast system that we're fully immersed in. But see, they're putting customer experience here. Entertainment and customer experience are the two top tier labels that they put out. Why? Because that's how they control the masses. Through entertainment, which is distraction. No critical thinking when there's entertainment. It's sensory overload. And customer experience, consumerism. Just like Herbert Hoover stated. Consumerism is the motor of the progress of the U.S. economy. Okay, without that, the country folds up because that's the way it's structured today. Continuing, cities need to develop a collaborative, responsive, and personalized urban experience with their constituents. Our citizens demand that we make use of the latest technology for their benefit. Okay, take that and 180 it. Our citizens demand. Why are citizens demanding? Because in the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, the demand is the reaction to the problem artificially created by the elite. Why did they create the problem? So that people will demand a solution. What is the source of the solution? It is provided to them. The solution is provided to them when they demand it by the elite, by those in control. That's the 180 of just half of this sentence. Continuing the other half, that we make use of the latest technology for their benefit. Their benefit. The masses? No. technology for the benefit of the elite, because technology is the control mechanism of the masses. It is put out in the propaganda piece here as technology for their benefit, the average person. We apply the 180 and we see the truth. That is technology to control the masses. It is not, therefore, to the benefit. It is not a benevolent system. Okay? And this is a statement by Harold Wouters, a consultant and former senior strategist for urban development in the Netherlands. He says, if we don't adapt to the new digital wave of developments, public authorities will lose their relevance completely. Well, public authorities have already lost the battle of relevancy. Technology can bypass public authorities, but public authorities want to leverage technology for their own career, for their own pocketbook, for their own wallet. Public authorities, civil servants, the bureaucracy never wants to give up a position. So they want to put up the image of relevancy by saying, we're bringing all of these solutions through technology to you masses that are trapped in the cities and have no voice and no choice, and fight with traffic every day just to get down the street, and there's not a cop to be found. Therefore, people drive any way they want to, literally driving through red lights, literally cutting people off, all of the horrible, nasty things you can think of in terms of the horrors of driving in a downtown environment goes on blatantly because law enforcement is not enforcing the laws that are on the books. It begs the question, why? Why are law enforcement officials who answer to City Hall, why are their hands tied? Why are they not deployed out there enforcing the laws and making the streets safer and making it so that the city's traffic can flow, which would boost the economy, boost the standard of living just by solving the traffic problems? Why are law enforcement officials having their hands tied behind their backs? Because it serves the problem, reaction, solution scenario of the elite. Solution is mass transportation, isn't it? Solution is self-driven, autonomous vehicles, taking the driver out of the equation, taking the automobile out of the equation, forcing people not only into the cities but into urban transportation. This is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a violation of our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, plain and simple. That's what you see when you apply the 180 to these statements that I've just begun to read to you. This is what happens when you're on patch air at 30,000 feet. You have the broader perspective and you see the game board and you understand how the game is being played. I'll continue with the article. But cities must take a more proactive, sounds so warm and fuzzy, must take a more proactive approach to advancing this future, instead of waiting, as they typically do, for citizens or businesses, especially tech companies, to bring ideas forward. Just as businesses are shifting from delivering end products to providing open platforms, where customers can co-develop and use products and services and access relevant data and interact directly with each other to create their own value. Cities will need platforms to collect input, including data, from their population and use it to co-design new ways to live, work, and do business. I need to stop there, okay? I may end up reading most of this to you. I'm sorry. I'm getting agitated with this because it is such propaganda. Let me extract a couple of things for you. Cities will need platforms to collect input, including data, from their population. Well, aren't they already connecting us to everything and already collecting our data? We have spent several issues of Entangled magazine talking about data and information. Data is worth more than gold. I've published that fact. It's certainly worth more than gold, than crude oil and refined fuels. Much more valuable than diamonds. I wrote a whole article last year about De Beers and the false valuation system they created for what essentially are worthless stones. There's no shortage of diamonds. It's artificially shortage induced because they're stored in De Beers warehouses. It's all manipulated. It's all engineered. This is all well thought out. Not perfectly, but it's thought out ahead of time by the elite. This is all manipulation. Collecting data because it's the most valuable commodity on the planet, which leads to probabilities of human behavior, predicting human behavior. That translates to control of humans. And then predicting. Prediction is actually the most, as I have published and spoken about, predicting the future is even more valuable than the data itself. And most don't realize that. Because if you can predict the future, not only can you control people, but you control the system of commerce, you control the system of economies, you control the system of wealth building, if you can predict the future. That takes us all the way back through the centuries to geomancy, the art of divination, practiced by the kings and queens. Divination ensured the integrity of their leadership, their royalty status, ensured the increase in the treasuries. The fighting and winning of wars was all through predicting the future, folks. And none of that has changed. It is all the same. The only thing that has changed is technology has accelerated the process by which you divine, you predict the future. It's still geomancy, whether it's a classical supercomputer or a quantum computer. It's just an acceleration of the ancient dark magical practices of divination. So the most valuable commodity on the planet is the production by way of data of predicting the future. Okay? So it's nonsense when they say in the smart city initiatives that they need to collect input and data from their population and use it to co-design new ways to live, work, and do business. The translation of that is control of the populations. Co-design means we're going to tell you where you're going to live, in what you're going to live, how you're going to get around, and what it is you're going to do to earn a living, and what your life is going to look like. That's what co-design, new ways to live, that's what it means in this propaganda piece. It says here, continuing, they will have to master the quid pro quo, as companies are doing with their customers. They, meaning the cities, the employees of the city, doing business with their customers, and deliver value in the form of greater responsiveness, personalized experiences, inclusiveness, and community connection. Let's break that down. Deliver value in the form of greater responsiveness. When have you ever seen a bureaucratic entity be responsive? Personalized experiences. When's the last time you had a personal rather than an impersonal experience with a bureaucrat? Inclusiveness. That means you have a voice, and a voice that is actually valued by the city fathers, the leaders, that you're included in the process. No, 180 that. Technology is excluding you from having a voice. And lastly, and community connection. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll give community connection to them because they want you to be connected to the hive mind. They want you to be part of the community, part of the Borg collective. That's what community connection means. Let's continue on. Cities that are unable to make these shifts risk not only losing citizens' trust, but also missing out on the potential gains from urban transformation. Potential gains. Sounds like Bernays. How can I profit from transforming the urban environment by manipulating the masses trapped in that environment? They risk losing citizens' trust. Well, I got news for them. They're not listening. The citizens don't trust those in the city ranks. A smart city senses and responds to the patterns its constituents create as they travel, workshop, and seek entertainment. Ooh, there's entertainment again. Responds to the patterns. Have we not talked at length about how AI learns? It learns by observing the patterns of human behavior. Smart city senses and responds to the patterns its constituents create. That's AI, folks. Smart cities are AI driven. That's what smart cities really means. It means the AI is going to sense and respond to the patterns of the constituents. That's human behavior that it's learning from. Then it predicts the human behavior, enabling its control of humans by way of predicting their next moves as they travel, work, and shop and seek entertainment. Yet no smart city can accomplish this without real-time data about its infrastructure, inhabitants. Wouldn't you just love to be called an inhabitant? Makes you sound like a gerbil. About its infrastructure, that's your cage and your wheel, inhabitants, and activities. Real-time data, that's AI, folks. Okay, that's edge computing. That's sensors, nanosensors embedded in your product packaging, in your foods you consume, throughout the environment, nanosensors connected to the Internet of Everything, collecting data about what you're doing and feeding it to AI. Smart city means AI. Cities thrive for the past 200 years by having access to great infrastructure, waterways, transportation, and jobs, says Kirk Talbot. Really? Well, let's go back 200 years. I think that was horse and buggy, wasn't it? Great infrastructure, waterways, and transportation. Waterways were steamboats 200 years ago. Transportation, it was mostly on the rivers, folks. And covered wagons. And jobs. Yeah, they were agricultural jobs. They weren't living in the cities. Kirk Talbot, CIO of the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, and formerly the Deputy CIO and Executive Director of Smart City, City of Atlanta. He says, the next 100 years will be marked by access to great information. It will be one of the key deciders of success or failure in the future. Well, I got news for you, Kirk Talbot. You can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, much less in 100 years. In my book, the book of Revelation in the Bible, within the next 100 years, God is going to burn all the elements, including all the technology, and he's going to reconstruct in his own version of terraforming of planet Earth itself and the human race. So Kirk Talbot, you need to get with the program, dude. Continuing, people wonder why, for example, when Google and Amazon, oh, those are shining examples of corporations. Oh, they're just totally benevolent. People wonder why, for example, when Google and Amazon can use predictive modeling to suggest what users want to write or need to buy. You see, there it is, folks. This is why we laid the foundation for months upon months talking about predictive modeling. That's AI again, folks. The local government can't proactively fix a pothole. Well, that's a true statement. Drive the streets of Boston. They might as well call it Pothole City. Man, oh man, it destroys your vehicle driving through Boston. Cities have been growing without respecting their citizens enough, says Ivan Caballero, CEO of City Beats, which helps cities develop citizen engagement and civic analytics platforms and mobile applications. And now those citizens are asking for more. Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. Of course they're asking and demanding for more because these bozos created the problem. And what's their solution? More technology, more data, more AI. All that, put the big equal sign at the end of that equation, equals control. Okay, there's your 180. More, according to Caballero and other smart city advocates. Don't you just love it? Oh, they're advocates. Ooh. Meaning having an environment that citizens can shape to their benefit with data. Well, let's see if we're gerbils and we're in a cage of our own making, trapped by technology. It's an environment that citizens can shape to their benefit with data. Sure you can. Whether they are actively contributing their opinions about plans for a new neighborhood development or passively providing their vehicle location data for the city to manage its traffic signals. Give me a break. They're collecting data so that they can track you and control you. I'll tell you that if the city of Boston is collecting data from vehicles to manage traffic signals, get rid of the computers and put a traffic cop at every intersection, every freeway on-ramp and off-ramp. It would be a lot cheaper than all of this data collection you're doing. You could hire thousands of traffic management people to stand out there and direct traffic. What a concept. Something they did 200 years ago, folks, with horse and buggies. All right, let me skip through some of this other nonsense. I don't know if I can stand to read any more of this. It's so aggravating. If you want the link to this, let me know by email and I will send you the link to this most aggravating article. It is pure propaganda. It might as well have been written by Bernays and his guys, okay? It's just Hegelian dialectic on steroids. Let's move on to something else. Oh boy, maybe it's because my air conditioner is off and it's getting warm in here, but, you know, play the little fiddle, cry, cry, cry. No big deal. All right, let's move on. This was met with a little bit of consternation by a few of the patrons that emailed me back after I sent you this article entitled Facebook Replaces Jesus with Magic for the Holidays. That was my title. Here's the actual title from the Facebook article. As it's loading here, it'll pop up hopefully. All right, this is coming from Facebook Business. It's entitled, It's Not Magic, It's Insight. And they have two people with reindeer antlers, felt ones, on their head. Well, they're red. Antlers aren't red. Why are they red? Well, I'll tell you why they're red. Because those are not antlers. Those are devil horns. If you're going to say the holidays and not Christmas, And you're going to say the holiday season is driven by magic. Well, magic's straight out of the pit of hell. So I'm sorry, those are devil's horns on their heads, not reindeer antlers. Insight, Illuminati. Insight, Lucifer. Okay, I'm just taking this apart real quickly. I agree, as some of you have written to me and asked me about my position on Christmas. It is a pagan holiday. It is not the birth, it is not the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. It is a pagan holiday, including good old Santa himself, St. Nicholas, okay? It's all pagan rituals, including the Christmas tree. Okay, and you guys all know that. I don't need to elaborate, but I'm stating my position. That's why I look at this Facebook article when they say it's not magic, it's insight. It's pure Luciferian nonsense. And heaven forbid, and I say that on purpose, heaven forbid this Facebook promotion of getting your act together early for the holidays, for being a good consumer. Heaven forbid they would even cite the name of Jesus Christ and use instead of holiday season Christmas, because that's just too Christian, even though we as Christians know it's a pagan holiday. Okay, enough of that nonsense. Let's go to something else. Let's go to Netflix. By the way, Netflix in the last, I think it was the last quarter I was reading today, lost something like 166,000 subscribers, and their stocks plummeted on the news, something like 10% in valuation, because people are recognizing that Netflix, for the most part, has a lot of really sick programming, their own original programming. Apparently, they spend something like $16 billion in original productions, original programming. And I got to tell you, Netflix, not only what they offer really is basically just sick and perverted, but their selection is very limited. And a lot of just old movies. And, you know, Kathleen and I don't have a lot of time to watch movies, but when we look at what's offered in Netflix, because this article popped up today that was sent to me by one of our patrons called The Great Hack, an original program by Netflix itself. I sent this to you to watch the trailer. And this is concerning, you know, the whole controversy about and the exposure of Cambridge Analytica. And that was Facebook, so I'm segueing from one Facebook article to another. You already know everything that this movie is going to present in The Great Hack. Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and the selling of your private, supposedly, ostensibly, your private information to third-party vendors like Cambridge Analytica, who then, as a broker of what was supposed to be private data, broker your information out to manufacturers, suppliers, business people for the promotion and sale of their products to you. Again, think about Freud and Bernays, consumerism. Okay? That's what Cambridge Analytica lived and died by, was the collection of your data from Facebook and other social media platforms. But Cambridge Analytica is not the only game in town. They're not the only player in this. They're just the ones that fell on their sword in a very public way. And so that's what this movie, The Great Hack, is about. I haven't watched the movie. It's enough to look at the trailer. It's old news to you and me. I probably won't even watch the movie just because it would be a waste of time. You and I are so far ahead of the curve because of what we've been conversing about in science and technology, examining the evidence of evil. We're so far ahead of this movie that this may as well have been published 10 years ago. It's such old information. And I haven't even watched the movie, like I said. It's just looking at the trailer, you get the gist of it. You know that there's no privacy. You know that everything has been hacked, and it's not even hacked so much as it is the system is designed this way. I've shared with you over the months and the years that Facebook, Google, Amazon are all products of DARPA. They're all DARPA programs. And by that, they are intelligence community programs. They are military intelligence community programs. They are government-funded programs. That's how they got their start. And the joke is, today there's the article that Facebook was fined $5 billion. Well, they make something like $315 billion in revenue annually. So they were fined $5 billion because, they violated the Facebook users' privacy. That's what the Great Hack is about. Isn't it funny that this promotion on Netflix of the Great Hack comes out the same day that Facebook was fined $5 billion? The news came out. Maybe it came out yesterday, but it's close enough, okay? Close enough for government work, let's say. There's no hack. This is a system. This is an engineered system. Social media set up by the government. That's not conspiracy theory. Those are bona fide factual statements from evidence. So let's go to 30,000 feet. Let's pull back from all of this and say, why is the Great Hack even allowed to see the light of day? Why are they even talking in a negative way about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook? Why? What purpose does it serve to the controlling elite? And I'm using the word elite because this is what Bernays and others labeled the controllers. We're really talking about the financiers of the world. And behind that, the Talmudic Kabbalists. Okay, just to be very summary in explaining the layers of control. Being very succinct in that description. But the point here is, why put out such a movie? A quasi-documentary. It's in the genre, according to Netflix's own category. They put it in the category of documentaries. And they say this movie is controversial, provocative, and cerebral. Oh my. Oh my. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. We're in the Wizard of Oz. We're laying down in the field of poppies and falling asleep because we're the masses. We're the herd. From 30,000 feet, to what purpose does it serve to put this out? Purposes of the elite. Problem, reaction, solution. It always comes back to Occam's razor, the simplest solution. Okay? Problem, reaction, solution. Is their MO, their modus operandi, through the years, even through the centuries. So they're creating the problem by saying, hey, you guys heard about Cambridge Analytica. It was in the mainstream propaganda news, right? Okay, so you heard about this. This is a familiar topic to you. So guess what? We're going to talk about it because we want to stir you up again. The mainstream propaganda news stirred up the masses by breaking the story. Now they're going to stir up the masses again. They're reminding the herd that there's a problem. It's called privacy. That's why they call it hack. Because, it was kept private, but it was hacked into. It was stolen. Your privacy, your private information was stolen. You were violated. What's your reaction emotionally? You've been violated. See, they're hitting you at the emotional level, the Bernays level, the lemming level. Hack is a trigger word. I read to you in my article for Entangled magazine in August, the word trigger. You see, in mind control, MK Ultra, Bluebird, anything you want to talk about in the world of mind control or brainwashing, there are trigger words, aren't there? Well, this is what is done on a massive scale, is to trigger. Hack, like conspiracy theory, is a trigger word. It hits you emotionally. You are repugnant to the phrase conspiracy theorist. Okay? That shuts down all critical thinking on the part of the receiver who's labeling you as a conspiracy theorist when you're really a conspiracy researcher. So the word hack is a trigger. And people emotionally respond to that. Yes, I've been violated. So that's the reaction. What's the solution? Well, maybe I'll watch the movie to see if they present a solution. Because the solution that I have pointed out to you, which is not hard to figure out, the solution to the perceived notion of violating the privacy of your private information, the hacking, the solution that the elite offer is already on the table and has been for years. It's called blockchain. Because they have promoted blockchain as the way to secure your information, calling it a decentralized platform, when in fact it is controlled in a central mechanism called quantum computing. Quantum computing controls, in a central fashion, blockchain controls all your private data, and I put private in quotes, controls all of your data by encrypting that information in the blockchain. And the only one who holds the private key to decode that encrypted information is the holder of the quantum key from quantum computing encrypting your data. So, those of you that have the time to watch this movie, let me know what the solution is in the problem, reaction, solution Hegelian dialectic. Let me know by email if they offer blockchain as the solution. That's my prediction. Okay? So that's my commentary on the Great Hack. I think that was everything that I had for this evening. Of course, there's always a lot to talk about. Always, 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 just tons. But that's what I had prepared for you for this evening. So looking forward to Sunday, I would like to take some questions from the chat room. I'm on my own, so I'll take a look at your questions in the chat room. But Sunday, Kathleen and I, Lord willing, will be together for another live stream with you on camera, both of us. And we are going to be launching into talking more about the broad topic of the fullness of the Gentiles, but we're going to break it down. We're going to get into some subcategories of what really we mean by the fullness of the Gentiles. And we've already said, but I'll repeat the hint, it is not a number. It's not the number of the Gentiles. It represents the fullness. Okay? Let me get back over here where I can see myself on camera. And let's see, if you have any questions in the chat room, Andy Parton, you always have good questions. Anthony, will you please tell again why Aristotle said that technology hinders the mind? Well, Aristotle and Plato. Now, last month in the July issue of Entangled magazine, I devoted the entire issue to philosophy, the philosophy of Aristotle and Plato, and brought it up into the modern times. Okay? So what I think you're getting at, Andy, here in terms of technology hinders the mind, we have to imagine the technology that was available at the time of Aristotle. Okay? Certainly the technology, an easy one, was geomancy, divination. The divinatory processes, which included geomancy, which was the preeminent But you had aeromancy and necromancy and spatulomancy and firemancy, if you will. Earth, wind, and fire. Okay, all of the elements were employed in the mantic practices. Okay, so that's an idea of the technology, but technology from the viewpoint of Aristotle, and that technology hinders the mind. Aristotle, in summary, in a nutshell, believed in the concept of the infinite. Opposing that was Plato, who viewed the cosmos, viewed reality, viewed humanity, but viewed the origins of everything as finite. And it is the Plato viewpoint of the finite that science uses, for example, at CERN, in saying that they are trying to discover the origins of the universe, the prima materia, the singularity, okay, through their collisions of particles. Well, that is a viewpoint of Plato and the finite, contrary to Aristotle. So if we're focusing on the infinite of Aristotle, he believed that humans were capable of infinite thought, infinite imagination, infinite creativity, and conceptualization. You see, this is what sets us apart from the animals, as far as we can tell the mind of animals and their intellect. What sets us apart is our ability to conceptualize. Aristotle said that that was infinite. So if we are talking about the technology available to Aristotle at the time, he was viewing man as being limited by technology, because technology, just like CERN, technology, geomancy, and the other mantic practices, because divination was the preeminent science of the day, predicting the future was the focal point of all of the scientific disciplines of the time of Aristotle and Plato. Their science focused on that, meant that technology represented by the mantic practices were finite, just like the perspective of those at CERN seeking the singularity. That man's ability to predict the future was based upon a technology that itself was finite. Finite because it relied upon numbers. Numbers are not infinite, according to Aristotle. Plato saw numbers, mathematics, as finite. You could always arrive at an exact solution, a final solution in mathematics, according to Plato and according to Pythagoras. But according to Aristotle, mathematics was also limited in the way that man employed mathematics, because in the ability of the human mind to infinitely conceptualize, mathematics was infinite. In the mind of the human, mathematics was infinite. But in man's application, in a finite way of random number generation, through the mantic practices, of which geomancy is preeminent, that was limiting. That was self-limiting to man. Thus, the technologies of the day, the mantic practices, being finite because of the limited mathematical 16-figure system, and that 16-figure system in geomancy, the maximum number, the finite number of permutations, meaning combinations of the 16 geomantic figures, had a finite endpoint, which was 65,536 permutations of the basic 16 geomantic figures. The technology of the day, therefore, was limiting. It was finite. It was limiting man's, according to Aristotle, infinite capability to conceptualize everything, including mathematics. So I hope that answers your question. Excellent question. Okay, let's go here and let's see. Let me back up a little bit. Let me get back to Andy's question so I can see where I left off. If I miss someone, just email me later, okay? Or put it up again and with my name highlighted. Alrighty, let's see. Okay, I won't mention the name, but in chat the question is, do you smell civil war, Anthony? Do I smell civil war? Well, I'm not prone to prediction. But smelling, I can do smelling. I got a big enough nose, I can smell. When Donald Trump was running for president, my first reaction to his running for president was that I labeled him the agent of disruption. Problem, reaction, solution. Certainly, he has divided the country rather than bringing it together. And I'm not taking a political stance. I'm not left, right. I'm not Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or anybody else, okay? Because that's all bread and circus. That's all theater. It's irrelevant. Don't be distracted by it. But I'll deal with it right here. Because Trump, as the agent of disruption, has disrupted the country to where it's now even more divided than it was as I was relating to you about the 60s and 70s with Laurel Canyon, the hippies, LSD, Vietnam, and the moon hoax. That whole three-way dynamic that I talked about yesterday. The country's in a worse state now than it was in the 60s and 70s in terms of civil unrest. There's more racism if you want to go there. There's more prejudice if you want to go there. There are more special classes of people today. There's more division into multiple camps, but in general, two camps. The left-right paradigm of the theater. Remember, in theater, there are two masks. There's the smiling mask, and there's the frowning or crying, distressed mask. In theater. Two theaters, two camps in the theater, two masks, two divisions. Politics is all theater. Are we on the verge of civil war? Let me put it this way. If, and that's a big if Israel as the Zionist state, I'm not talking about the Jewish people, the Jewish race, talking about the state of Israel, the political entity Israel. If Israel is to be the, quote, timepiece of prophecy, I will say that because the United States and Israel are politically joined at the hip, economically, therefore, joined at the hip, and quickly, theologically, becoming joined at the hip because of the actions of the Kabbalists in this country. If Israel is the timepiece, if true war, let's just say the war between Israel and Iran, which then pulls in Russia, pulls in Turkey, pulls in NATO, if that war, preceded by Jeremiah 49, Ezekiel, and Isaiah 17, I think it is, the destruction overnight of Damascus. Let's make a fine point to this. If we see the destruction of Damascus overnight, which I believe will be by tactical nukes deployed by Israel against Damascus, I'm really hesitant to even be predictive. Let me just say I would expect, my conjecture, my theory, is that in this country of the United States there will be widespread civil unrest. Does that mean civil war? I'm not going to go that far. Widespread civil unrest, I believe, will ensue. And I'll make it very simple. Why? What's the cause? What's the precipitation? What's the catalyst? It's the word nuclear. If Israel goes nuclear, and I apologize for my California, some people have lambasted me about this. My pronunciation, because I'm from California, of nuclear, almost sounding like George Bush. Nuclear, if there is a nuke attack, the psychological effect upon the worldwide population, but obviously talking specifically in this case about the U.S. population, the psychological effect of the word nuke or nuclear against Damascus or anyone else, Iran by proxy because of the 100,000 some Iranian troops that are in Syria, I think people will tend to lose their minds. I think they will use it as an excuse. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Let me scroll down a little more. Better change our cruising altitude. It's getting crowded. I'm hearing 30,000 feet a lot lately. Okay, Jonathan. Let's go to 40,000 feet. Remind me in the next live stream on Sunday that we're flying at 40,000 feet. Okay. Someone mentions the revelations about the pedo stuff in and amongst some other subjects. Jeffrey Epstein, I guess the story came out today that he was found nearly unconscious in his cell. The whole story, I think it's for another time. It's for its own live stream. Maybe Wednesday I'll cover the whole pedophilia, Jeffrey Epstein issue. But I'll preface it by saying this in an encapsulated form. Ask the question, why would somebody in his position, as it's been portrayed, be exposed? Why would he be promoted, prompted, influenced to, in effect, fall on his sword? I let you answer that question. That's worthy of some critical thinking. Why him and why now? Not conspiracy theory, critical thinking. Because on the surface, it's easy to say, this is more bread and circus. This is more theater. Obviously, it goes deeper than that. And obviously, I'm completely cognizant of the whole pedophilia issue. Pure evil. Pure evil. But why him? Why now? I'll answer it for myself, but you'll have your own conclusions. I see it as more distraction. What is the distraction away from? What is, if they're dealing with this self-constructed mob mentality theory of Freud and Bernays, if they're trying to steer emotionally the mob, because pedophilia definitely is emotional, and he's a target, he's been put up as a target, stirring the emotions, but giving the emotions a target, which is pure mind control, mass mind control. You always have to have an enemy. He's been set up as the target enemy in the topic of pedophilia. Highly charged, emotionally highly charged. So you've got to direct those emotions at an enemy, at a target, so he serves that purpose. I can give you analogies from history, but I'm not going to go there. He is distracting the mob mentality, and I'm sorry that I'm using that phrase. They're distracting people away from Israel, away from the Kabbalist agenda here in this country. You and I have spent a lot of time conversing in conversation about Kabbalah. We've been revealing the agenda. I'm not saying we are the cause of Epstein being put up as the target now. We don't have that big of a voice. But there are others like us that have been talking about Kabbalah and have been talking about Israel and the Zionist agenda. I'll offer this to you. Perhaps there's enough that has been stirred up about Kabbalah and about the Zionist agenda that they needed a distraction. And they sure brought a big one up, didn't they? Perhaps. I don't know. But it is perhaps they don't want the public paying that much attention to the negative aspects of the Zionist agenda, driven by way of the Talmudic Kabbalists in this country and in Israel, because we are joined at the hip. Okay? I just offer that to you. All righty. Well, it is 2 hours, and I always try to be very respectful and cognizant of your time, so I'm not going to drag this out tonight any longer. I want to thank you all for your support through Patreon and encourage others. This is going to be a public broadcast on YouTube coming out tomorrow. So I'm encouraging folks that if you want to hear more information like this, become a patron. You will have access to 18 months of live streams 3 times a week, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours per live stream. You have 18 months of archives of Entangled magazine, every edition, monthly edition. Tons of information. You have access to our previous webinars, and you have access to the news articles that I send out on an almost near daily basis, news articles, to patrons. And you have access to these live streams and the chat room, which is a great place to develop friendships that we have seen develop here, and the fellowship that we have as Christians. So, a great place to hone your critical thinking skills without a lot of sensory overload happening, other than the moments when I get into my rants, like Boston. Okay? So thank you again. Appreciate all of your friendship, all of the information you send through emails, all of the prayers you send our way. Definitely this is spiritual warfare, and that is a topic that we have promised to you to devote a live stream to, Kathleen and myself talking not only about the fullness of the Gentiles, but one that is devoted to spiritual warfare. And I just wanted to let you know we haven't forgotten about that. There's just so much. I mean, we try to pre-plan out several live streams in advance what we're going to talk about, and then do the research for each one of those live streams. So we like doing the research. We like being your researchers and reporters. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll leave the chat room live for 30 minutes, as we always do. I'm going to shut off the camera and microphone here, but I want to say God bless you all and thank you for your friendship and your fellowship. Good night.